Publicly, the administration and the president's allies are defending this move. But behind closed doors, are they not worried that this broader plan is going to blow up in their face?
They certainly are, based on some of the aides we are talking to, because not only is the border wall unpopular, declaring a national emergency for a border wall is unpopular. There's been no proof to many of these voters on both sides of the aisle that a border wall is necessary, and they don't have proof that this national emergency fits the traditional definitions of an emergency. Some of the areas in which the president is looking at transferring funds include military projects, drug forfeiture funds, and there's just concern that other projects that really need to be funded won't be funded now to fund the president's pet project.
We just have to remind our audience the president has and will say he is checking this off his list as far as fulfilling campaign promises. He hasn't. Remember, the president said he wanted to build a wall and Mexico would pay for it. Now we are talking about $8 billion of our money. Charlie, I want to pay what Marco Rubio said a few weeks ago about the risk of declaring a national emergency. Take a look.
It's just not a good precedent to set in terms of action. It doesn't mean that I don't want border security. I do. I just think that's the wrong way to achieve it. It doesn't provide certainty, and you could very well wind up in sort of a theatric victory at the front end and then not getting it done.
Okie doke. So today we're going to get the theatrics, and the president will spin this as a win. What's your take?
Well, this is the worst case scenario in a lot of ways for Republicans. This is their nightmare scenario. Because
what Republicans,
well, Republicans like if Marco Rubio actually sticks to that. Look, the precedent this establishes is dramatic. I mean, this is reckless. It's dangerous from a constitutional point of view. It is likely to backfire. But imagine from the point of view of conservatives that Donald Trump actually goes to court and the courts establish a firm precedent of executive power, untrammeled executive power, to override Congress's ability to appropriate. Think about the precedent that sets for future Democrats. That's not theoretical. And Nancy Pelosi was doing some wizard-level trolling yesterday when she was saying, "Well, we could do a national emergency on climate, the climate,
on
or
gun
on
control,
guns, or on health care." This is not a huge leap, and this is why Republicans have been urging Donald Trump not to do this. Not to mention all the other problems, including the problems of eminent domain, taking people's private property. When people realize, where the money is coming from, how it's coming out of the military budget, and yet because of the way this is now set up, the Senate will have to vote on this. This is a very unusual circumstance, that if the House votes on this, Mitch McConnell will have to bring this up, and Republican senators will have to go on the record. And this is a red line for conservatives. We keep saying,
come on. We've been hearing about red lines.
Well, no, this is a substantive red line, because if you vote with the president on this, it's not just pro or anti-Trump. You really have given up the Republican brand as the party of limited government, as concerned about the balance of power.
Well, wouldn't you think blowing through the deficit?
Oh,
wouldn't you think the way we're spending? I mean, come on now with your red line.
Well, this ought to be a red line. This ought to be a gut check for people like Mitt Romney and people like Marco Rubio and Ron Johnson. You are members of a co-equal branch of government. You're not just potted plants. You don't work for Donald Trump. And there are the Article I powers of Congress. So you have constitutional issues, you have the political issues, you have the legal issues, and this is going to be very interesting to see how they respond.
Well, you'd have to prove that you have a gut in order to get it checked.
Yes.
Michael, what's your take on the precedent this is setting, not just for future Democrats? Could this be the president's new jam? If he doesn't get what he wants from Congress on anything, he could say, national emergency time.
Yeah, I think it's ill-advised. I think it's short-sighted, but that's better than corrupt and unconstitutional, which is the area he often plays in. I think that he also hurts himself. He hurts the constituencies of conservatives. All those 4 departments that thought they were getting the money, they're not going to be happy. The public's not happy with it. And as someone who really does think climate change is an actual emergency, one day there's going to be a Democratic president. And if this goes through, there will be no way that Congress can ever say you're not getting whatever funding you want if you say the emergency is climate change. So maybe, $8 billion is actually not that much. And walls, it seems fine to me, actually, but climate change is a big issue. A Democratic president will be able to get whatever funding he or she wants by declaring it an emergency.
Okay, well then here's what Speaker Pelosi said about the precedent for future Democrats in the Oval Office.
Democratic president can declare emergencies as well. So the precedent that the president is setting here is something that should be met with great unease and dismay by the Republicans.
What's your take?
Well, we've been here before historically with other presidencies. You know, the Roosevelt administration made some people uncomfortable with the notion of executive overreach, and term limits came out of that, among other things. He tried to pack the Supreme Court. Nixon and Nixon's illegalities and criminal acts, renewed focus on the powers of the presidency. I think one of the interesting things with the Trump administration is despite his excesses and his faults, will this make people on both sides of the aisle reconsider what that office is about and put in some new procedures and practices around it so you don't have someone else in the future coming in and doing a Trump? Will presidents be required to submit their taxes? Will presidents be required to actually wall off their finances and assets from their own personal self-interest? And in this case, this is a complete effort by Trump to do an end run around the Constitution. It's the Congress that controls the purse strings on these kinds of things, not the executive.
Doing the Trump like it's a dance move. Charlie, help me understand politics. Why does Ann Coulter's view matter so much? Who is Ann Coulter's base? Who is she speaking for? Because we're actually at this moment in politics where you have a bunch of new freshmen, excited, energized, but maybe overzealous and ill-advised far-left Democrats that are a gift to Republicans. You've got all these people in the center right now saying, I'm sorry, what's in this Green New Deal? What are New Yorkers doing with regard to Amazon? This doesn't work for me. Yeah. If the president actually chose to pivot, you'd get a whole lot of people holding their nose, closing their eyes, and say, I may go with this guy again. If he wasn't siding with Ann Coulter. So I need to understand who is standing behind Ann Coulter saying, bravo, sister? I don't know who that person is.
Well, first of all, this is important because this was a really bad week for the Democrats, and he's flipped the script on that, which is really remarkable. You know, Ann Coulter is really not the problem. I mean, look, Donald Trump is terrified of getting crosswise with his base. He just cannot lose any of his base. But I think he was more concerned.
And she represents his base?
Well, she represents a certain hardcore of his base, and she's not going along with it. But I think he was more concerned about the people who will get in line, you know, the Lou Dobbses, the Sean Hannitys, you know, the Laura Ingrams of the world, where he's got to be on the phone with them saying, if I can just get through this news cycle, I'm willing to create a precedent that's going to...
Here's the thing.
Yeah,
Sean Hannity isn't breaking up with Trump ever.
Right. And he
so
never
why
will.
worry about that? Why not think about all those people in the middle who he could win over?
Well, I actually don't think Hannity and Coulter are part of the base, just to refine that thought a little bit. I think they're part of Trump's obsession with how he appears and is promoted in the media. Right. And what's happened now is he's a creature of the media. And he obviously has a small segment of the Republican base, a significant but small segment of the Republican base that he feels he needs to pay attention to. But what's happening with Hannity and Coulter is they're playing on Trump's ego.
Right.
And his complete actual insecurity that is often underappreciated about who he is.
And he has a binary of toughness and weakness. And I was watching the Fox News broadcast of his El Paso speech, and Hannity interrupted it and said, if this spending bill comes to pass, they'll be hell to pay. And that's what
they'll have to answer to me. And that's the thing that I keep going.
Right. So when
I'm like, what is like they're going to have to answer to me, Sean? What does that even mean?
When Charlie says Ann Coulter's not the problem, Ann Coulter shouldn't be the problem if she's properly ignored. But if you pay attention to her,
but
then
that's
she becomes
what I mean.
a problem.
If suddenly tomorrow Jack Dorsey turned off Ann Coulter's ability to tweet.
Right.
Who is she speaking for, and who is she speaking to?
Yes, people who will never be satisfied.
She's cracked the code, though. And Tim, you're absolutely right here. She's cracked the code that if you go after Donald Trump and you say that he's not manly, that he's losing, he's weak, that he's a surrender monkey. She understands the psychology, so she gets under his skin, which is why I think he's not following her on Twitter anymore. So this sense of that I can't go out there.
He blocked her.
Wait.
He's not following. He's not following.
I don't know.
He's not listening to her anymore. But today he just cannot walk out and have everybody say this is a humiliating surrender. You're a terrible negotiator. You are the worst negotiator ever.
When
so
he
had to have
up,
something.
Except Eugene, when he leaves and goes down to Mar-a-Lago this weekend, the people who are at Mar-a-Lago Mar-a-Lago are not Ann Coulter and Sean Hannity disciples. He's surrounded by New Yorkers who are going to say, good on you, Mr. President. Glad that you found some sort of compromise. So that's the thing that I don't understand. The people who are at Mar-a-Lago are not Ann Coulter's.
They aren't, and we know that the president is concerned about his base, which is not Ann Coulter. The highly affluent people who supported him and who vacation in Mar-a-Lago, which are not Ann Coulter. But he knows that Ann Coulter will get covered. He knows that whether he follows her or not, what she says will get through national media, and that he'll have to hear those words. And he wants approving coverage. That's why he attacks the media. That's why he attacks people who criticize him. And Ann Coulter falls into that category, and he can't get away from that criticism.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.